question that we try to answer is this: how do we mobilize our knowledge? And we don't think about knowledge as something that you can put in a container, but knowledge should move. And our starting point is this. If you work in a research university, in a public institution or a private institution, but your research is funded by public money, that research should be accessible. That's the starting point.
Yes.
So if we don't do that, then we have a problem. But that's the starting point. And we try to figure out with this grant what were the strategies that colleges in research-intensive universities were implementing to respond to that ethical demand? Were they doing something different from past practices? Were they creating college-wide strategies? Were they incentivizing in one way or punishing in another way? We do know that. We have a lot of information that that was a topic that was very important, and lots of colleges, our previous research, were exploring ideas around impact, relevance, prestige, popularity. I'm telling you all the words that were used. Usefulness, there were colleges that have these categories of usefulness. And knowledge mobilization. Knowledge mobilization is the one that is mostly used in Canada and in the Nordic countries. So we decided that knowledge mobilization was broad enough to capture all of those, and we started. This is something that we started to ask questions. How often do you how do you publish your research? How do you decide that? What's the criteria? Or how do you decide when your research is making a significant contribution? And one of the things that we encounter is that most people refer to the past. And in the past, there was the assumption that the process was simple. I'm going to give you this example. That is me. So what's the metric that everybody uses? That one. Journal citation reports from Thomson Reuters, the impact factor, journal citations, or Google Scholar citations, or ResearchGate, whatever is the name that they use. But more or less goes like that. Sylvia, that is around here, she knew me when I had her. That was a kind of, that's it, simple. But there are certain complications with that. So, number one is that from that period, that picture is 10 years ago, to today, the industry was transformed into that. So when I was a student in the University of Buenos Aires and I asked, how do you do research? My faculty told me, you go to the library and you read everything. I was working on indigenous education with indigenous communities. And this is, go to the library, read everything there on indigenous education. And I was a very obedient student, procrastinated a couple of months, but finally I went there. And there were 100 articles on indigenous education in Argentina and 35 books. I read the 100 articles, 35 books. When I went to UCLA, several years later, to start my PhD, I went to the library with the same spirit. I'm going to read everything. Except that now UCLA had an entire wing of the Latin American studies area with more than 20,000 articles, I don't know how many books. It was impossible. So I couldn't do that. And our students today, they cannot do that. All this has a cost. This is the cost of scholarly publications in 1 year. Just the journals. If you add the scholarly books, it's another $5 billion. If you add the grants, the research support, we reach trillion. And if you start adding salaries, then we are talking about a lot. There is nothing wrong with that. We need to use, doing research is expensive, so we need the money. But there is a serious problem when societies start to ask the question, so what? And the so what for colleges of education is very complicated, as we found. If those who study sociology, you are going to recognize that this is the Pareto principle. Across disciplines, 80% of the citations go to 20% of the researchers. That's, sorry. But we have another one, that is the Matthew effect. The more citations you get, the more citations you will get.
Right.
But all of that doesn't take in consideration your field, your traditions, the epistemological differences, the relative size of fields. If you do philosophy, you will have a field that is smaller. I look at Michelle, I'm trained. But doesn't tell me anything in terms of influence, prestige, or other things. So, but all that model of counting citations as the key element has been used, and it's been used in different ways. In the field of education, we have another problem, that is our field covers from the social sciences to the humanities. And so this is the average. If you work in education closer to the social sciences, you do sociology of education, 40% of those articles will be uncited. The other 60% will collect at least one, except that 20% of authors that will collect 80% of the citations, but at least one citation. But if you do history on the humanities, 80% will be uncited. It doesn't mean that it's bad scholarship. But when people do the very quick counting in some other universities, this appears to be the key marker. So I call this the research education uncertainty principle. We are uncertain. So we have lots of journals, lots of publications, and still people complain there is no place to publish. My research is not, because this is true. If you publish, if you want to publish in one of the universities that we visited, the rule was if you want to get tenure, you need to publish in these 10 journals. There were just 10 journals that you have to publish. And the average time for publication in those 10 journals was between 2 and 3 years. And it was unfortunate when you have 10 assistant professors and tenure, and they have to publish in those 10 journals. They have to compete with them. And we know that the editors, you know, unconsciously in many cases, other times consciously, they don't want to publish people from the same institution very often. Doesn't look good. So it doesn't tell us anything about the merit of the articles, but it tells us a lot about the problems with the publications and using that. Another problem that we have is this. I don't know. I will suspect that many of you are reviewing for more than 5 journals every single year, several articles. And it's getting worse. is getting really, really worse. Our system of peer review needs to be defended, but we need to adapt to these new realities, and we need to experiment in different ways. Because for those who are associates and full, the story is different, but for assistant professors, it's getting really complicated. So that takes us, to this. At the moment, there are 19 countries that distribute research grants and allocate funds based on that impact. And impact has been defined in very strange ways, but NSF is now asking for measures of impact. The Canadians are asking for measures of impact. Norwegian, Sweden, Spain, Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So we call this the metric tide. And the metric tide may reach dimensions of a tsunami. And we need to be very careful. But definitely, we are going to have metrics. We are having more metrics. And this is creating a lot of uncertainty among colleges of education. So this is not new. This is a New Yorker cartoon of 1968. But that was something that one of the faculty that we interviewed in one university told us, that that was the feeling that she had. That she was in front of lots of people looking at her, not to help, but to kill. So, the other finding that we have, so the first is that the anxiety among colleges of education is increasing. And that we are still discussing in different language the research to practice gap, the engagement challenge, the relevance challenge. But the good part is that this linear model seems to be now more challenged. The colleges that we explore, they are looking at this not just in the traditional model that there is a gap, but looking and exploring and implementing different strategies. So if you want, the results of our research can be summarized with, for some people, this is a problem of the half is empty, half empty. And for me, it is half full. What we found is an incredible amount of strategies being used by colleges of education in research-intensive universities addressing this issue. So they are trying. Caveat, they are not happy with the explorations. But they are exploring, they are trying, they are implementing. And everybody is implementing, looking at how to assess these different practices. So, different models, but most of the models looking for partnerships, trying to avoid the unidirectional top-down or enlightened model. One of the challenges that we discover is this, that colleges of education and faculty share similar values about how to mobilize research. Similar values, but at different times. So, those values are in tension. Colleges have to do research, teaching, and service or community service or engagement with the communities. And that has to be balanced. This is what the faculty told us, that they give priority to these three things. In their daily lives, these are the things that they value the most. And this is what they think that the colleges of education prioritize. Both faculty and colleges value these 6 different type of products, but at different priorities. And in many cases, this is what the faculty feel. That they have to postpone their values for a while to do that. I'm sorry. Faculty and the administrations were not in contradiction. This is important. There is a this is like consensus. We need to change. The differences are in terms of when to change. The big change, as you can expect, is tenure and promotion. The points of tension happen always at tenure and promotion. Lots and lots of faculty express urgent desire of collaborating more and working more with schools, museums, prisons, hospitals. That there is an understanding that engaged research, defined in very different ways, but is what should be their model of doing research. Without sacrificing, nobody says, I don't want to publish in high-impact journals. There was no contradiction. I want to do engaged research, and I want to publish in top-tier journals. The problem is that the timing doesn't help. So most of the assistant professors says, I'm going to do engaged research once I'm full. The risk is that between that moment and promotion to full, you may lose the skills needed to do engaged research. And universities are not paying attention to that. The administration is. In the 3 colleges that the administration is aware of this, but they haven't resolved this issue. And this is the image that captures what most faculty told us, that they feel that they are a race and each of them had to race alone. We couldn't find good ways or strategies that were collaborative and that sum or contribute to the different research teams. Faculty express, why am I being always compared to such and such? It's like, I don't want that comparison. That's on the side of the faculty. We also went to schools and policymakers in the neighboring areas to see, so if these colleges are implementing all these strategies, how are those strategies perceived in the neighboring areas? You know what's coming, no? I can skip. Okay, I skip. One interesting finding with regards to this is the use of social media. Everybody is using social media. Everybody says we need to use more social media. And everybody was unhappy with the uses of social media. So this is another of those strategies that everybody is saying, yes, we need to do more, not very happy with how we do it. And that was the first finding with the communities, the neighboring communities. They see the ongoing challenges, they like what they're seeing, not very happy with the results. Trust is the key word in the relationship between colleges of education and the outside communities. In those cases where there were recognized researchers that engage, the perception was better. In colleges that are large, with lots of faculty, lack of trust was what was mentioned most frequently. Teachers and policymakers saying, well, it's hard to read these materials, but when it was mediated by a trusted colleague or relationship that was better. So, because you know all this, I want to go to this is the image that was described by a teacher, that is the way they feel. It may be very similar to how we feel, but in the schools, this seems a lot more pressing. In the schools, they feel like that, and that they are alone, and that one of the elements that the neighboring policymakers and practitioners were saying is like, will be good if the colleges of education will take a more public, a voice defending the public in more articulated ways, because this is how we feel. And this is how we feel. So those two images for me are the two cartoons. This is one that expresses the desires of faculty, and the other the desires of the practitioners. However, I am very optimistic with this. First, because all the colleges that we research emphasize engagement. And that is, oh, sorry. What's happening here? All the colleges are looking for different ways. Oh, it's synchronizing with my phone, sorry. Okay. Oh. There are changes. They are experimenting with new ways of mobilizing the research. They are exploring new ways of assessing that. In a few instances, creative activities, production of podcasts, more engagement with blogs was considered part of the scholarship, not separated. That is creating some tensions, but it's happening. Long-term projects are more valued. And there is this consensus. There is a lot of consensus. We didn't find, as in previous research, that open access or making research accessible was punished. So there are ways of protecting. And on the local practitioners and educators, also was consensus about the importance of this. So, knowledge mobilization appears as attention. Colleges and faculty want to engage, but there is no clear way of doing it, particularly at the moment of tenure and promotion. Tenure and promotion appears disconnected to knowledge mobilization. That is important, because if we want to change that, we will need to rediscuss what are the elements that will count as impactful or relevant for colleges of education. Knowledge mobilization doesn't seem to be rewarded. So lots of faculty were saying, why am I going to do that? That takes a lot of time. So some colleges, what they are doing, they are selecting faculty that are the exemplars. And then they promote that as the college is doing this, look at the work of such and such, but it's not an institutional strategy. So this is something that needs to be revised. What we found is that with all these things, we are operating in a very conservative way because we don't engage in both inside colleges of education and at the university level in other type of discussions about tenure and promotion. If we don't engage with the discussion of tenure and promotion, we will continue with this very good examples, interesting initiatives, very good exemplars, but it's not going to be widespread and used by the college in general. So these are our recommendations. I have one more that is a little bit different. We think that it's important to start experimenting and rewarding knowledge mobilization. If you think all of, well, I don't know if all of you, but those who went to ARA last 2 weeks ago, you saw a lot of experimentation in knowledge mobilization. But when those faculty return to their institutions, it's the same line in your CV saying, I did a TED Talk style at the ARA that it took me, I don't know, a whole year. How was the process? A year in preparation? Well, it's a lot different to do that than I just go and do my 15 minutes presentation. It's the same line. And universities need to start paying attention that a keynote or a TED Talk or those things are different and should be assessed in a different way. So that's what we advocate in experiments. So there are 95 definitions of knowledge mobilization out there. Here is the 96. For us, the point is to increase access and usability. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on usability. Usability is not usefulness. Usability is not practical. It's ease of use. If our research is complex, and we think that we do complex research, we need to move to usability. And usability means the priority, because it's research, will remain in the scholar-to-scholar communication. We don't lose that. We do want to have our research peer review, very rigorous, published in the best journals in the field. But that shouldn't prevent us from making that research accessible and potentially used by multiple stakeholders. But that shouldn't be the responsibility just of the individual faculty. That needs to be the responsibility of the institution. The institution could support that. We are good at doing research. All the other part, we need teams at the university, at the college, that will help us. Why? First, because it's the ethical command. We do most of our research supported by public money. So the access, we need to guarantee that. We cannot avoid making our research accessible. I'm not promoting breaking copyright laws, but there are ways of doing it without breaking the law. And the second is, the more we put our research in accessible forms that can be used by multiple stakeholders, in those interactions, in those engagements, it lays the potential of increasing the quality of the knowledge produced. So there is one ethical dimension and an epistemological dimension. We don't have enough data to prove the second part from our research, but we saw that as a very strong potential. And now that we are extending our research to Brazil and Spain, we are seeing a very similar phenomenon. So the more the research is used, the more we are confronted, even when the research is used in improper ways, when you engage and you confront with that, you revise and you make your arguments more robust. So it's not easy, it's super complicated, but we have plenty of good examples of how this is happening. We saw preliminary evidence that tell us that making accessible research is something that the colleges and the faculty like. They feel that that's important. And the usability remains as an expression of desire. But on the side of the practitioners, they want that. On the side of the policymakers, they want that. On the side of the funders, they like that. So we see this as a challenging scenario, but very promising. And we think that this is something that we need to work at the institutional level. If we put one more demand to the individual faculty, particularly assistant professors or professors in the tenure track process, we won't be making any progress there. But if colleges generate, and they're already generating many of these things, better social media, better translational support, better training in how to present. Some colleges are avoiding the death by PowerPoint that I just exercised here. So, but those things are cost effective and increase the usability. And if it increases the usability, increases our standing in the public arena. And if it increases our standing in the public arena, we meet the ethical demand. And I think that that's a very good starting point and a nice way of finishing this. Thank you. And hopefully you have questions.
Just briefly, so I'm just curious as to whether you all thought about the emphasis that's placed on publishing in scholarly journals. That kind of emphasis is not just moved towards, for example, an assistant professor blogging all the time, and that being worked into their tenure and promotion. So that same emphasis would still be there, but just in another format. And I understand it may be reaching a broader population, which may not necessarily be a good thing, especially depending on what point the research is at. But I'm just curious as to that first piece.
One of the concerns at the level of the administration of the colleges is with what I will call the Carl Sagan complex. That when you reach levels of popularity that take you outside the scholarly community will look down on you. That's one of those colleges that have bloggers, very famous bloggers or influential bloggers, are looking at that. However, what we say is a little bit different. If you are good at blogging, good blog. But blogs and research articles are two different, products. We need to have both. But if you are good at producing rigorous research, maybe the college could support the translation of that into blogs eventually. But it's very difficult to be a good blogger. There are few examples out there, but few examples. When you think about the collective, a whole unit, you need structures of support. So if you can do that, great. I think that we will not replace one with the other. For those who are assistant professors or about to get their PhDs, one of the things that the data shows very clearly, not for this research, but in the research on open access, is that contrary to what we thought, more visibility in the public arena also transfers to more citations. The message that we give to assistant professors and PhD students is don't blog, don't do Facebook, don't do this, don't do that. And that may be wrong. The problem is when faculty do one and stop doing the other. We need to do both. And the same way we have support to do research, we may need to have support for the usability of our research. That will be an alternative, but we have a lot more examples of people saying, don't do that, than do it.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I'm not exactly clear on my question, so maybe the way I said it wasn't very clear, but for example, the picture of the firing squad that you had up there.
Yeah.
And that was an image representing somebody's feeling about having their necessity to have to publish in order to get tenure.
Yeah.
I can see that as that same feeling, but later maybe in 10 years somebody saying, I feel like that because I don't have enough pages on my blog. If that makes sense. So I guess what I'm saying is the emphasis right now that's placed on professors to publish in scholarly journals, that emphasis could be moved over to scholarship that people feel, all right, now I have to do this, and I have to do this to the point that it loses the value.
We don't have evidence that this is happening in terms of, what we know is that this is the bloggers versus the non-bloggers tension, that it was visible. There is a popularity contest, if you want. But colleges are pretty clear that there is a research dimension that needs to be emphasized and protected. The other is important, but the primary is the research and teaching. That one. Only one college has a very systematic and very complicated way of looking at the social media activity. And they are giving to each of the blog posts a digital object identification, and they're connecting that with the altmet. I don't want to make it very complicated, but there's a way of tracking your social media life with altmetrics, and that requires a unique number, and this is digital object identification. So the college is paying for that, and is hiring the service of a company that is collecting that and trying to use it, but people that don't blog are not, there is no punishment for not blogging. There is punishment for not publishing. Eventually it could be, I don't know. Michelle, here.
So I'm curious about sort of the role of politics, so partisan politics in all of this. So when I think about the usability of research, what knowledge is paid attention to, in the public sphere. So did politics in that way come up? We think about sort of, more right-leaning think tanks and their work in the public sphere versus maybe other work that is intended to be more public, from the academy. Do people talk about that in the politics?
There is a very high concern among assistant professors of staying away from being perceived, and the blog part connects with there, and the social media, to being perceived as producing research that will be partisan or will be ideologically identified as, and cutting the connections with the party. On the policymaker side, we found what we already know. In general, they look for research that supports their already preconceived, decisions. I need research that will support charter schools. I need research that will go against charter schools. So, but that is what is there. But when our research is not, more accessible, that can tell counter stories, either way, in favor or against, is very problematic. So we need to do more. But the policymakers and the educators in positions of authority, they just have the same complaint as, oh, you guys write in a way that nobody understands. And when we said, what? But look at all the work that you have here. And in some cases, there was a lot of evidence of very good, accessible research. Yeah, but that center is, is not providing exactly what I want. I was like, well, what they want is something that will support their preconceived ideas. I think that if more colleges were moving into the same direction, probably we will be able to do a better job in making rigorous research count for more in the policy arena. But at the same time, there is a perception that we are doing that we are getting better. The colleges are participating in the study, but also what we are seeing in Spain and Brazil, ARA, lots of organizations moving that way. We cannot control how policymakers use our research, but we can still present, counter-narratives.
Thank you first for doing this research. I think it's really important work to be documenting, how schools of education are engaging in the field. I had a question about your educator sample. Is it teachers? Was it leaders? And
we have 65 practitioner sample, and they are mostly teachers and 6 principals and 3 policymakers. And 1 union representative that is
I think they're pretty different populations.
Yeah.
So for our center, the National Center for Research and Policy and Practice, we just concluded a nationally representative sample, 700 principals and district leaders. And one thing that's striking that resonates is the role of professional associations as the site where they actually access research. #1 source.
Yeah.
But one thing that's a little different is that that group was very positive about research. They saw it as relevant. For the most part, they thought it was credible. They did note that we had political biases that we brought, and they recognized those. And they said they used it a lot. And so I'm wondering, there's some differences between different, I wouldn't guess that we'd have the same results with teachers. So I'm wondering if you noticed that pattern of differences in leaders versus classroom teachers.
Yes, there is the policymakers are aware of the research, and they are aware of the research that they ignore, and they are very clear in, we ignore it because we prefer this one. And they don't have a bad impression of our quality. We went with, they are going to tell us that we are doing bad research. That wasn't the thing. Nobody says that the research is bad. It was more that it was difficult to use. But when you provide examples like, well, but you have all these materials that are translations or applications, like, oh yeah, that's good. Yeah. And in one case there is really a very good example of building trust among these communities that we found it kind of a very interesting and promising strategy. So every 2 months, in one of the institutions, the researchers, superintendents, and policymakers in the area, every 2 months, they get together for lunch, 2 hours, and they talk about what's new and what are the problems. That's the agenda. And it's, over years, what they say is like, well, here we have plenty of evidence that there is communication, and more communication increase the use of research, and the increase of use of research is showing results in the classrooms. And so that was very good. Changing government. But it takes time to build those relationships. I would like to to see to what extent in the fine-tuning of our results we coincide or not. It's good. Erin?
Yeah, thanks. This is thought-provoking, and I think something it brought up for me when you were talking about like the image of the person in front of the firing squad, and the person walking toward people with weapons, you know, for peer review. Made me think about maybe this is really old school, but you know, coming from a background in science, I see the peer review process as being totally essential and a part of the knowledge production process. And I don't want to be tweeting the preliminary findings I'm coming up with my research team. I want to be tweeting out finished articles that have gone through peer review that has made them so much better than they were when they came out of my office. And I'm just wondering what surfaced for you around that tension of, you know, because there is on the one hand like this perception that, oh, everyone wants me to publish and that's the way it runs here, but as looking at as though that was external to what we're actually engaged in as researchers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the big tension happens at, you know, the moments of tenure or promotion, and that's where you see the tension. Among faculty and administrators in the College of Education, I have no evidence whatsoever that faculty don't want or look down on peer review. Peer review is important. We recognize that peer review is important, and there is no that we could improve. Yes, but we want to keep publishing very rigorous research. No problem there. The problem is with the numbers that are circulating in kind of a gossipy way, that everybody has to have more. And everybody has to have more in this top, you know, the language of the top tier journals, or the high impact journals, or in the preferred list of. It takes time. So, and because we use the same, usually if you are a good reviewer, editors will keep sending you more articles, and you know, we have that problem of the time. That is what the perception, that, you know, not that I have no evidence. I'm trying to remember, it's like nobody said, no, you know, this is a rigged game. Although people use a lot the expression, we need to play the game. I know that engaged research is the best, or design-based research, or participatory action research is what I should be doing. That's where my heart is. That's what I want to do. But that takes a lot of time to publish. So I need to do that. But it's not against peer review. And most people are happy with, I want to use social media to promote my research, but they are not happy in the way they are doing it. And I don't know how to explain that. Because I think that we are doing a pretty decent job at communicating that this is accessible. Maybe there's a better way, but it's generalized. Everybody is doing more social media. Kevin?
I have three different things I'm thinking about, so I want to see that hopefully they connect. And these arise out of our work at NEPC, but also mainly out of the work preparing for AERA. So one thing is that one of the things that we were surprised about, particularly in preparing for this pre-AERA meeting that we brought together a bunch of deans from around the country, was how many places are doing innovative things. How many places we came across that we didn't know anything about. We're finding ways as schools of education or colleges of education to incentivize or support or both.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if that's something you've also found, if you could discuss, sort of, are you bringing that together? Is that going to be a resource that you can share with people? And then connected with that, a lot of what you've been focusing on here is on the incentive side. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the support side. Because, I mean, one of the things that we've done at NEPC has been sort of this facilitating. There is this hunger among a lot of experts, academic researcher experts, to speak to a broader audience, but really not knowing not having the resources or mechanism or process to do that. I'll stop there. There's a third.
Okay, so this is very important. There is a lot of strategies out there, and I think that they are very promising. One that we are developing to try to see if we help is another toolkit for research usability, because we'll explain this. One of the issues that we have is that there are no good baselines. Maybe you have one at your college, but in general, there are not good baselines. And so when they're making complaints, you are not doing that. It's like, based on what criteria? So what are you comparing? From when? From 5 years ago? From last year? A decade? What? The only thing that every single college has is how much money are they bringing? And the ranking in the US and News World Report went up or down one position, because that's more or less what's happening. But in terms of research use, research production, we don't know. There is no good baseline. So, and if there is no good baseline, it's difficult to plan. If it's difficult to plan, then it's also difficult to assess. So what we are trying to do is a research usability toolkit that is asking people to, I know that you do this. Every year you ask for money to go to conference and to support some research activities. So imagine that instead of just doing that, you says, this is the research that I have. I would like to communicate this research with these different audiences. I'm collaborating with such and such in making this possible. These are the resources that I think I will need, and these are the indicators that I'm going to use to assess if I met, if I reach the desired audience. And now the college gets that information from everybody and starts saying, okay, we need 3 filmmakers, and we need 3 hours of filmmakers, and we need a journalist that will interview and do that. And we need a designer that will help us to prepare these 10 PowerPoints. And so you start planning over a longer period of time, instead of each of us individually trying to be good presenters, good performers, good researchers, good writers, you can do that. And that also will give us kind of counts of, okay, we send 65 people to, I don't know, the Colorado, you have your annual event that the reception, the reception, the ERA. So we have 200 people, and the collective reach in our meetings was X, and our papers were published here, and you map. You can do a much better analysis of reach beyond the citation, without ignoring, I want to emphasize, I'm not against counting citations. Citations is one form of engagement. But right now the only one that we have is that, when we can plan differently. So those toolkits for research usability will help, we assume that will help, because it will make this college-wide and not just individual by individual. Right now, most of the colleges are having a system that is, I have a good relationship with the Dean of Research or with the Dean, and then I ask for support. It may work. It seems to be working, because there are lots and lots of different initiatives. But we couldn't find a good strategy that is college-wide, that we say, okay, here, this is the support that they get for social media, this is support for design, this is the support that they get to prepare for presenting to policymakers, this is the support that they get. That, I think, will not be so costly. The money is in the system, Kevin. For me, this is we already have a lot of resources but they are not being used. We found colleges that have entire TV studios, journalists on staff, filmmakers on staff, designers on staff, but they're not being used. So I don't know if I answered to your satisfaction, but I tried.
So, I mean, what you're talking about...
I'm sorry.
Oh, you're behind me, sorry.
No, please, go ahead. And I'll go next.
I was just, the way you're talking, I mean, it's very interesting the way you're talking about people engaging and working together. I mean, it requires more collaboration and teamwork across projects. I think people within large projects do that, right? You build in a graphic designer or you build in a communications firm into your large when you get a really big grant, right? But what you're talking about is a culture shift, not just in providing the support to individuals, but in the idea of I, as a scholar, don't need to be an expert in PowerPoint and infographics and media communications, right? So it's also a culture shift in turning over your work and collaborating with somebody. How have you seen people making that shift? The humility shift, I don't know how anyone else would call it.
And it's very hard, but one possibility is this. So each college gives $1,000 to go to a conference, but there is no support for the translation of another language or another medium. And you have a team of 5. Well, sometimes you could say, okay, we have $5,000. But if we collaborate, maybe the dean or the research team will give us $7,000. Just one of us goes to the conference and we use $1,000. Another one goes to the TV show, and another one does this, we tend to, I don't know, value just one. When we value one thing and one thing alone, everybody will go like, the narrow path. And we see this happening. It's complicated because those teams need to decide, well, you're better at presenting, I'm better at writing, I will do the writing, but I want to have credit also for the presentation because I collaborate that. But I think that all those are, I'm optimistic. I see movement there that I didn't see years ago. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So just to follow up, because I'm seeing a lot of grad students in the room, and what are examples that you've seen of people coming together and creating these grassroots movements, if you will, to push the institution to do the kinds of things that you're talking about, the kinds of things of pulling resources. So how is it that, I don't want to say put pressure, but how can we encourage, how can we support not only the dean, but also at the president level, so they can,
the counterintuitive finding. Visibility brings also more usability. So in appropriate way. So the problem is that we have to do both. We cannot go the way of social media and blogs and all that without doing the research. We need to. The very good bloggers are also very good researchers. So show that you are a very good researcher and ask for support. It brings visibility to your institution. Your institution will be better off, and you contribute to that. But we did something in one of the. We found that lack of trust was what characterizes the relationship between one college and the surrounding community. And lack of trust requires a place to meet. If you don't go to the same place, it's just how do you build trust? So now there is this semi-annual event that is a mixer. It's just a mixer where people go and make a commitment to have one more action in the following 6 months. An action could be, I'm going to give you this book, send me comments, or I'm going to visit your classroom and I will give you comments, or let's go for a coffee because I would like to discuss. And the graduate students, it is really unbelievable because they feel part of that community. They are building relationships that they hope to carry over time. And it started with 20 people, and the last one had 185 RSVPs, and it's like, okay, so yes, there was a problem and there is a good strategy to do these things. So, but I will not discard the very rigorous research at the beginning.
So I'm experiencing obviously some discomfort, but it won't be what you think. I think that you express values or imply values that resonate with me, but the way the talk was structured, we kind of ended up in a place that I think emphasized communication as the meaning of usefulness or utility, and downplayed what you were saying earlier about engaged scholarship. And I heard you say, but I just want to re-emphasize that to me, engaged scholarship is the kind of research that takes its questions from practice, is conducted in context of practice, so we don't have like the external validity problem, and is immediately usable in those contexts, but sometimes not very broad. And those same things make articles relevant and valued. And so it felt to me like you ended up with more of, instead of that immersed vision of scholarship, back to a linear dissemination, translation, handoff to media experts kind of person, which I think we need to do that as well, but it's not the same thing as engaged scholarship. And I just had to say that.
No, it's not the same, but I don't think that everybody, there is room in these colleges for engaged scholarship in that way, and engagement with other scholars in different ways, or with policymakers in different ways. So we need to do both. The multiplicity and the diversity of modes of approaching research. I will say among assistant professors, the desire to do engaged research is accompanied by a fear that if they do that, it will make their process for getting tenure harder. So they kind of postpone. They said, I don't know how to quantify this, so I'm not quantifying, but there is a difference between the anxiety that you have when you have to go through high stakes situations like tenure promotion and fear. And we found in some institutions that promotion, anxiety, tenure, fear. And fear produces the opposite result of what the metric tide that we started proposed. The metric tide was, let's encourage innovation. So we see a lot of innovation at the college level in trying to make it easier. But with the process of tenure, we don't see, we see faculty trying to play very, very, very safe because they are afraid. If colleges could make more emphasize, because I think that they share the same values. The values are not that different. It's just how they see the translation of those values into practical actions in the process of getting tenure and promotion. If colleges, ARA, the philosophy, all these organizations could make more clear public statements saying, we value engaged scholarship, and we know it takes more time. We know, so don't be afraid. if this is what you are good at, this is what you want to do it. You are not going to be punished for that. I think that will resonate really well in the field, and will stop this sense that the only way is just to publish in the top 10. Because the top 10 have a very limited number of places open for publishing. So every time you publish, your colleagues next door that could be as good will not. And that's a problem. So we don't disagree. Sorry. Apologies for not presenting very clearly.
So actually I have a couple of things. One is, it seems to me a lever for supporting change is actually coming from the funders, whether they're foundations or even the feds. And so I don't know to what extent you talk to those folks about how they support and or require kind of broader forms of partly communication, but also the conducting of the research. And then the other piece of it that I'm really interested in is just expanding the ways in terms of incorporating multimodal communication in our, especially our online spaces.
Yeah.
So I was really excited about AERA's online journal, and then but when you look at the specifics of what they're looking for, it's more around sharing of data and making data available versus really experimenting with multimodal forms of communication. So I wondered to what extent either or both of those came up in your conversations with folks.
With the funders, we know because we started looking at what was the global trend with that, and so when we discovered that there are already 19 OECD countries with very specific laws regulating the metrics that are accepted and how they count and how to reward, that was very interesting. In the field, there is a big concern. Spencer, Ford, WT Grant, Kellogg's, MacArthur, all of them are, either promoting it and having it as a very important criteria for assigning grants, or they are looking for ways of assessing the current impact of their grants. So they are discussing about this, and WT Grant specifically, they are now, it's like, what are the incentives that we need to use to address Michelle's question? It's very, very specific, and if anybody has a good idea how to convince policymakers to suspend their beliefs and start using good research, go to Adam Gomoran, you will be very successful. It's very difficult.
I just wanted to add, I think though that the grant-making institutions are a big, and our structure of R&D is a big part of the problem. So the one program to build infrastructure for research practice partnerships is Spencer, and it's $400,000 for 2 years. But if you promise a randomized control trial at IES, an effectiveness study, you can get $5 million for that. So, and it's much harder to do partnership work and do good partnership work, and yet the money is all out of whack.
Yeah.
And you don't get to sustainable improvement or partnership through this scale-up model of research. And that's the common guidelines between IES and NSF, and it's pretty much every funder. They're like, we want to see what's innovative. But you tell them you're going to build infrastructure for partnership. See ya. Like, how do I get my name on that? And it's hard for the funders.
Yeah. But it's happening at the same time, because
it's like pennies on the dollar.
But compared to 5 years ago,
I'm with you.
We are
it's
like,
better than it was.
I'm in the today I'm on the positive side. Tomorrow I'm going to be there. That is happening. With regards to the publication side, this is our fault. We.
Right.
Because seriously, there is no impact. I was in the founding moment of the ARA Open, and we wanted to make it multimodal. why not? Just the question is why not?
Yeah.
You could use it. You could do it in a much better, more comprehensive, more rigorous. There are a few journals that are doing that. If you have any proposal for that, just talk to me. EPAI will be open for that type of experimentation. We already do that. The Europeans are getting a lot better at that.
Maybe one, or do you want to do one or two more?
I know that you are super busy, so this is the third or the fourth in the day. I'm happy if you send me an email if you have questions, and we will see each other at the ARA or another places. Or if you go by ASU, I'm happy to continue this.
Well, please join me in thanking Gustavo.
Thank you. Keep with your meetings. I give you the...
Yeah.